Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you're all doing good and having a good week. Been a busy one for me as house stuff continues and internet woes have been popping up as at the old place and the new place. It's been kind of interesting. Luckily, that has been fixed, so I could upload the show today. But it's probably going to be a little bit of a short one today. I think as I just really didn't have a lot of creative juices flowing this week. Nothing really jumped out at me as being a kind of an obvious show topic. But as the week went on, I got interested in the situation with Gonzalo Lira and his potential murder in Ukraine. So that is where what we're going to talk about today, because I think it provides us some things to think on as we face situations in our own country. So, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll dive right in here and let me give you a little bit of a background. Gonzalo Lira is an internet commentator who goes by the handle Coach Red Pill, or more commonly CRP, which is what I'll use for him going forward here, just to keep it simple. CRP came on the scene about 2010. I think he had a YouTube channel back then, and then I think he got booted off or closed, and he started it back. He was able to get back on there. I'm not real sure, but he was on some social media, and his primary focus is relationships, or it was relationships. He put himself out there as kind of a relationship coach, and that's kind of where the name came from. It's kind of his version of the men going their own way, or what you could call male empowerment, I guess you could say. He falls into that camp that believes that men are far too often getting the short end of the stick when it comes to divorce and child custody and so forth, and that kind of stretches all the way back into the beginning of relationships. So he had offered advice on how to handle all that. That was kind of his little niche. It's not something I ever really put a lot of thought into, honestly. So I was not really aware of him or listening to him until well after he had actually pretty much dropped off the internet for a while. But he had evolved into the same circles as other YouTube commentators who had kind of followed the Trump train, so to speak, and got he kind of got pulled into that group. The Killstream guys, Mr. Medicare. There's a whole bunch of other folks that were kind of in that circle. And eventually, most of those guys got banned from YouTube, and I think CRP was one of those. Or at least, like I said, he pulled his channel down and migrated to other platforms. But he would pop up occasionally in conversations on those other shows, and that's kind of how I heard about him. He, I had watched a couple of his videos from what, people had recommended or had mentioned him on these other shows. But I just never really got into his take on things, and I didn't really follow him. I just knew who he was. So I can't really comment on the quality of his shows because, like I said, I just didn't really watch him. So, you can go look him up if you're interested and want to kind of form your own take on him, to look at some of, his historical information and what he's put out there. What I do know is that he was fairly polarizing to these hardcore kind of internet blood sport people, those types who, followed those live stream debates, I guess you could call them. They really weren't debates. It was mostly two guys kind of, tearing into each other and making fun of each other or whatnot. But anyway, some people like that kind of stuff and find that funny and enjoyable. It's not really my thing. But anyway, people either loved him or they hated him, and that kind of continues today. So he popped back up because just after the war in Ukraine began, he comes back onto social media, his social media pages, and he starts posting videos from inside the country. Now, some people have said that he lived in Ukraine this entire time, and when he was doing videos, I don't know that to be the case. I thought he lived in California, but like I said, I've really only watched a few of his videos, and honestly, it's just not critical for me to look that piece up, so I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time on it. I do know that he is not Ukrainian. He's originally from Chile, and that's an important point to keep in mind here as we go along. But anyway, so CRP pops up in Ukraine, and he explains that he was in Kyiv visiting friends and family, and that he was basically trapped there. So he was going to be reporting, on the conflict from the country. And from that point on, until April the 15th, he would deliver live streams and recorded videos of him talking about the conduct of the war and what was happening. And more importantly, and relevant to the discussion, he was highly critical of the Zelensky government and the actions of Ukraine in general. And here's where, the meat of the thing. These videos put him on the map, so to speak. CRP became somewhat of an instant celebrity, I guess, as they say, but he gained popularity on conservative channels and shows, as a guest, and he was given an alternative view of the war, and that ran counter to the narrative of the official powers, and as you might guess, that is bad. So he became so vocal that he was even picked up by Russian media, and his reports were being used to, inform, or I guess you could say influence, Russian-speaking people about what was going on in Ukraine. So then along comes the progressive media in the form of the Daily Beast, okay? The Daily Beast does what can only be described as a hit piece on CRP, which is bad enough as it is, but they went back into his history and talked about all in the manosphere, as they call it, and talked about his videos and his take on that men going their own way thing and male empowerment and all this, and just really dredged it up to call him a misogynist and all the the litany of anti whatever terms that they use. But that, and if that wasn't bad enough, they went multiple steps beyond. They reached out to the Ukrainian government for comment and informed them that at this point, CRP had relocated to Kharkiv, and they wanted to know what the Ukrainian government thought about this person in their country speaking counter to the quote-unquote truth, at least as they present the so-called truth. Essentially, the Daily Beast put a light on CRP and bird-dogged him to the Ukrainian security service. Now, CRP sees this article, and he actually put a video out, an internet and commentary on that particular publication of it. And he pointed the finger right at the Daily Beast and said, this article is going to get me arrested, or might get me arrested, and probably disappeared. And in fact, he said, if something happens to me, if you don't hear from me in 12 hours, just assume that, something has happened. So he knew that was coming. Now, concern began to grow on the right as people took notice of the fact that April 15th comes along, and CRP put out a few messages, and he had scheduled some interviews with a couple of shows, and that was the last that they heard of him. So he missed these interviews, and that began to kind of highlight the fact that something might be going on there. So then a few days later, there's some cryptic tweets by the local to Kharkiv, as what can be called, I guess, military or security unit. Some of these units in the Ukrainian military are kind of amorphous as to what function they serve. But anyway, they're known as the Kraken unit. They're some kind of spinoff from the Azov battalion, but they have this affiliation with the Ukrainian security service. But anyway, their leader tweeted out some messages that people interpreted to mean that perhaps CRP had been picked up and maybe had come to an unfortunate end. And then there were some reports from supposedly credible people, Scott Ritter, I'm looking at you, that CRP had indeed been arrested and tortured and ultimately killed by the security service. Well, late yesterday, a bit of light begins to show, and some messages pop up that were from CRP on his social media pages. And this morning, thankfully, we get the word from him himself in the form of a video interview that he is indeed alive and well, although still feeling the shock from his experience. He was indeed arrested by the security service and had all of his digital devices taken from him. So, in effect, he was silenced by them for many days, and that's why no one has heard from him. I didn't see much more of that video, so I don't know if he went into more details or not. I think it was only about 5 minutes long, so I doubt it. But I think we can conclude at least at this point that he is okay, and will likely give his full account of what happened at some time in the near future. And that gets us all kind of caught up to the point that I wanted to discuss today and go into, and that is, when does resistance become stupid? And before you go off on a tangent, let me kind of fill out that statement. I'm not suggesting that people give up. What I'm talking about is the fine line between bravery and stupidity. What constitutes bravery, and when does it cross that line into stupidity? When does an act of stupidity that works produce a positive outcome, and if that happens, is it no longer stupidity? So I think these are important questions in light of the fact that what CRP faced in Ukraine is very much what we face here when we run counter to the official narrative. And as I mentioned earlier, many people don't like CRP, and they've been kind of yucking it up for the entire time that he's been missing, calling him stupid for being in the Ukraine and in effect supporting the Russian invasion. Now, I chalk that up more to their dislike of him than to any real analysis of what he was doing, or really even any malice towards him. I don't know that they necessarily hate him so much that they wish him bad. It's just sort of the general, I don't like him. And I stop short of calling those people cowards, because I don't think that's the case here. It's just more of their dislike kind of coloring their opinion of him. But that said, are they wrong here? How smart is it to be in a foreign country to you? Recall that I said he's not Ukrainian, and to openly be critical of that country in a time of war. And that's the key thing here. I myself have taken someone to task in the past for doing this. It was even, I guess, what I call worse, or what I thought was a little bit worse, because this person that I took to task was here in this country on the taxpayers' money. They were a part of some kind of government exchange of students and whatnot. So it was funded by U.S. taxpayers. And I appreciate the fact that they didn't like something that we were doing at that time. But, don't come here on my dime and then shit in my floor. Now, in hindsight, I don't like what we did either, but that's neither here nor there, so moving on. But I can understand the viewpoint of the average Ukrainian who might see what CRP was doing as supporting the enemy. And I don't think he will find a whole lot of sympathy there in that country, at least among the Ukrainian speakers. As you may know, there are Russian speakers in Ukraine who might be sympathetic to the Russian cause. And that, I think, is the part of the issue for the Ukrainian government. Because, the Ukrainian government, like it or not, you don't have to like them, you don't have to agree with them. I certainly don't agree with their government, and certainly don't wish their government well, as much as I like and feel for the Ukrainian people. But the government, when you look at things from their perspective, they have to look out for the narrative and maintain the story at all costs. They can't afford to allow anyone to dissent from that narrative too far, because it risks everything. Okay, the Russian-speaking minority in the country makes up most of the population in the East, where the Russians are concentrated. And the Ukrainian government cannot afford to have anyone publishing information that could possibly lead to those people, shifting their sympathies and acting in support of the Russian invasion. So, since CRP is smart enough to know this, is he bravely facing those risks to deliver these reports? Or is he really being stupid and needlessly exposing himself to the risk of death, or at least imprisonment? Now, let me define what I think bravery is, where the line is drawn. I think bravery is exposing yourself to the risk willingly, but doing so when the outcome significantly benefits others, more than yourself. The act becomes stupid when there is little to no benefit to anyone. But I do believe that there are times when someone does something stupid that turns out to result in a benefit. Think of it this way. There are times when you watch someone do something very reckless and you'll say, well, that's stupid, but they didn't get hurt, and then later you determine that they achieved something, some goal that worked out to the benefit of your group or whatever the situation is. The only reason that's good is because they didn't get hurt. It's still stupid and not an example of bravery, okay? I think it's a murky area, to say the least, and that's why they say that, that line is very thin. That's the saying, right? But I just kind of wanted to define that before we give an assessment of CRP here. And I don't call what CRP did brave. There are some people who are saying, oh, he's so brave for standing in front of the Ukrainian government. I don't think it's brave, but I don't think it's stupid either. I think it's reckless. It may turn out to benefit others in the end. That remains to be seen. So I would put it more in that last category that I was speaking of. It's reckless. I think that CRP found himself in a situation that he felt like he could take advantage of for his live streams, and he ran with it. And I don't criticize him for that. I think anybody would, look at doing the same thing themselves. But I don't think he was motivated by any kind of desire to stand up to the Ukrainian government so much, or even to really help out people of Ukraine or anything like that. I think he was just looking more at the view that it provided to the audience outside of the country. I'm sure he sees himself in the position of a reporter, and kind of feels like it's important to provide people not in country a view of what's going on. I don't know if he really understood or accounted for all of those risks until things developed, until later as things went along. He certainly understood it by the time the Daily Beast article came out, but I don't know that he went into it thinking about those kind of things. So again, I think that it's reckless, but as it has turned out that he didn't get hurt, and hopefully it stays that way for him, and maybe at worst he finds himself deported from the country. I think it's good that he was providing an alternative view of the war, but I don't really think his risk was worth that reward. He wasn't the only one there doing that. And in fact, there were people there doing it better than he was. So I'm just not sure that the risk was worth it. For him, I guess it was. He's gained some notoriety, but other than that, I don't know that it really provided us anything that we weren't getting from other individuals. But how does that relate to us here in the U.S.? Well, we face our own risks when we run counter to the narrative of the official powers that be. We face all manner of punishments: cancel culture, loss of job, loss of livelihood, and in the most extreme cases, incarceration and even death. The risks are very high. When we go into these things, you have to weigh those risks to the benefit that they will produce. When we look at events or situations that come up, you need to look at those potential outcomes. If you undertake these risks, we need to make sure that we are going to achieve something of benefit to others, not even necessarily to ourselves, but to others. Is your sacrifice going to be worth it? That's what it comes down to. We cannot afford to have people needlessly sacrificing themselves on the altar of this government. The stakes are just too high. And this ties into that transformation I spoke of last week, of moving from being selfish to being selfless. And I'm not being judgmental about being selfish, by the way. There's ample reason for that to be a legitimate mindset in many cases. And I just feel like we have to adapt to the situations and alter our mindsets to deal with them. Now, I think in certain times that we look at a larger picture a little bit more than our own personal picture, we can still act for our own self-interest, of course, but just recognize that there's something much greater at play here. And when you're acting in those larger, or as part of that larger picture, be more cautious and considerate of what the outcomes may be. You're too valuable to risk on something stupid. Now, I'm glad CRP is okay. I wish I could say as much for our current political detainees in the DC jail, but that is a situation that we're dealing with here. And we just have to adapt to it, have to roll with it. Well, that's all I got time for today. Come leave some comments for me at the videos or over on Gab. Like and subscribe, and always visit the mothership on a daily basis. Give that a read. Anyway, I will see you on the next episode.